Can't decide and torn between a romantic, comedy, action, or an indie film to watch for the weekend? Well. Golden State Media Concepts Movie Podcast is your ultimate guide to the latest movies. Join us as we dissect the latest on the blockbusters. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Movie Podcast.
Welcome, and thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Movie Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your gracious host, Melissa Goller, and I am so excited to air my show on the GSMC Network. I love podcasts and I love film. After all, I write them and I get them made. Combining those two things will be the basis for a show that I want should appeal to cinephiles all the world over. This will be a show where we discuss great films, no matter how big or how small. A show where we dive deep into how the elements in the cosmos came together to make them great. And a show where we will never be afraid to get creative. Let's do this. I originally planned to continue filling you in on the Big 5 film festivals that are worth everything to a filmmaker, as I left last episode with the 3 European ones and planned to close this chapter with the last 2 North American festivals, which are the Toronto International Film Festival and the Sundance Film Festival in Utah. However, last weekend, certain events happened instead. And I didn't feel like I could talk about the previous frivolous kind of topic when I needed to get this out of me here on this episode. In this episode, I'd like to start by doing something I haven't done before. Eulogize a person I have never met. In my head, we were thick as thieves. But in real life, we wouldn't know each other from anybody else. But I feel like we could have. I like eulogies. The couple I have written before have been therapeutic, to say the very least. They helped me process the loss for a moment, which broke up the blockage of pain I thought I'd never actually survive. Writing eulogies introduced me to the healing power of the written word and how laden with expression it can get, and how good that feels. This realization guided me into my foray into script writing. So I have that to thank for the career path I have chosen to torture myself with. I also enjoy a good eulogy. I really do, because what a better way to get to know somebody, what they did with their lives, and what made people love them or hate them. But of course, no one will admit that part. It's always, he was the best friend I ever had, or there will never be another woman like her, ever. I wish I could hear a eulogy that goes, he or she was a real son of a bee. But I'm sure they had their reasons. I'm getting into this kind of brutal honesty because the person I would like to start this episode remembering and cherishing would have wanted nothing more than a gut-wrenching criticism that hit you hard in the face because, she also probably would have blown cigarette smoke in your face at the same time. For the dramatic effect of tears, of course. And that wonderful, slightly unhinged force of a woman is Miss Olympia Dukakis. As I'm sure many of you know, Miss Dukakis passed away last Saturday at the age of 89 years old, leaving behind her 3 children, grandchildren, and a career spanning over 6 decades through every medium in the arts there is. And honestly, she probably created some new ones too. Olympia was born in Lowell, Massachusetts in June 1931 to a Greek mother and Turkish father. In a heavy Irish-dominated neighborhood, Olympia describes learning to fight, to toughen up, and drive people away in an area where ethnic discrimination, particularly against Greeks, was routine. She developed her fiery spirit out of a need to survive, and as a way to get out of the neighborhood she didn't want to be in. She was a voracious explorer and an overall doer, never one to sit still and wait. This kind of putting yourself first, flaunting your ideas publicly, was not understood by her mother, a woman who very much represented the older ways of living and thinking. Olympia describes her mother taking on the job of, quote, keeping shame away from the family, which more often than not took the form of me. Olympia was rebellious and independent. Her mother didn't like it. Olympia was prideful too, and the clash between them could only exist between 2 people with equal amounts of pride. Her mother wanted her to feel the shame for being loud, overly animated, not wanting to be in a one-man relationship, and worst of all, which is funny enough, for wearing pants. Her mother would hit her, demanding she feel ashamed of her actions and how that made her family look to everyone. Her mother wanted some sign that she would get the message that she is not a proper girl. She wanted her to cry. Be a girl that reflects the values of the 1950s. But Olympia wouldn't cry, at least not in front of her. Proper girl, she definitely was not. Graduating with a bachelor's degree in physical therapy from Boston University, where she became a state-winning fencing champion 3 times, she couldn't reasonably spend her life working as something her heart had no business doing in the first place. Interestingly, Olympia refers to her mother as the first acting teacher she ever had. One reason being her disapproval in her career choices. And if she hated her fashion choices, odds are she'd hate her career choice too. Her mother was her inspiration for her Academy Award-winning performance in 1988's Moonstruck, in which she plays Cher's disapproving, stuck-in-a-rut mother. Olympia improvised one of the most quotable lines from the movie, in which she says, "Oh my God, Loretta, what are you doing? Your life's going down the toilet." The scowl, the finger wagging, the head shaking, the yelling, the cadence in her voice. Olympia channeled all of that from her mother. Secondly, and a little more pleasant, Olympia's mother was a part of a dance group for Greek women, and she often took her daughter to their performances and assigned her small tasks like that of a stage manager. Tend to this, make sure everybody arrived on time. Is the music queued up? Has anyone seen the director? What kind of trouble has he gotten himself into now? A stage manager keeps everyone from falling off the edge of a cliff so that a decent performance can be put on to prevent an audience rioting for their money back. Anyway, one task Olympia had was to release a couple of doves as part of a grand finale. She positioned the cages toward the light, unlatched the hook, swiveled the door open, and out the doves bursted toward freedom. And when they got just above her head, maybe kind of forehead level. They left their droppings all over her. Olympia said later that that was a sign from the universe, telling me what show business was like, and to run. But Olympia fell in love with the business instead, even from that. In the 1960s, Olympia began her indelible theater career on the stages of the Williamstown Summer Theater in Massachusetts, where she always returned, no matter how brightly her star shined. She performed at the famous Delacorte Theater in Central Park, home to Shakespeare in the Park Place. She performed with the esteemed Shakespeare & Co. in Lenox, Massachusetts. She performed Greek comedies and dramas at the Getty Theater and the Hollywood Bowl in Los Angeles. And she blessed an international audience with her talents as well, reviving her role in a one-woman play, Rose, in Cyprus in 2012, following her stint in London's National Theatre, a performance that gave the show an Olivier Award nomination. My favorite accomplishment of hers, other than being good friends with Cher and Sally Field, of course, is her and her husband, Louis Zoric's co-founding of a theater company. I plan to achieve both of these things as well. A theater group and Cher and Sally as my friends. I'm speaking it out into existence. Podcast world, listen up. Her company, The Whole Theater in Montclair, New Jersey, was created out of dismay with the business and the lack of roles that she was landing. It's a tale as old as time. That's why I have my own production company. We all should if we want to make waves here. Olympia couldn't achieve what she wanted if she worked for other people and had to continuously fight other actors for her roles. Her stance on what is essentially auditioning and the cutthroat behavior that often follows it is so poignant and true. She said in her 2018 documentary Olympia, which it's about time someone made one for her, it was, "If I could become a good craftsperson, I have a reason to feel good about myself. If I could get on stage and do it better than other people, I could get parts, better parts, and more money. But in trying to win, you lose the playing with other people aspect. That's what acting is at its core, riffing off of each other, because in the midst of the anger and frustration and all this, acting is fun. It's playtime, just like kindergartners get a recess. But in competing so cutthroat, you can't play with other people. They're after what's yours. They're going down. Because what roles that they book are ones that you don't book. So, Olympia took her skills and understanding of the craft out of New York City and went to the other side of the Hudson River to New Jersey and started The Whole Theater in a building that used to be a Baptist church. The company got to do the plays they wanted and work with the people they wanted. Word spread about them, and the caliber of the performances in the small New Jersey town equaled that of Broadway. The company would put on over 100 shows over the course of 20 years. They did all kinds of work, from ancient Greek comedies to modern dramas, and The Whole Theater gave birth to other talents like Jose Ferrer, Colleen Dewhurst, Blythe Danner, and Samuel L. Jackson. Throughout the course of her prolific career, Olympia performed in over 130 stage productions, 60 films, and 50 television series, winning awards and accolades in all, including the Academy Award and Golden Globe Award for Moonstruck, and several Emmy nominations for her long-running, underappreciated, now cult classic, Tales of the City. Though she was blessed with one of the largest bodies of work out there, it was us who were the lucky ones. She didn't get to see herself transform, reimagine, and rethink everything we thought we knew about the world order. She felt it, but she couldn't see it. You can't see yourself doing something. But we saw it. We got the best seat in the house. I have always loved this woman. I even wrote something last year with her in mind. I'll always think of her and aspire to have her range as a performer and as a visionary. With that, this is a film podcast after all. I'd like to talk about a few films of hers that aren't as well known, like Moonstruck or Steel Magnolias, which is one of my favorites. But these films will still show the depth of her skills as a creative force that we need to remember. I won't ever stop talking about her. And I hope after you hear about the work she did throughout this episode, that neither will you. Stay tuned for the next segment when I discuss the first Olympia Dukakis film of the episode, Cloudburst.
Want to know the latest and hottest music hitting the airwaves? Don't be left out. Listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Music Podcast. It keeps you on the loop with everything you need to know from pop, rock, hip-hop, and the top 40. And we'll throw in news of your favorite artists, concert and tour dates, and so much more. Listen no further, because this is the gold standard in music podcast.
Welcome back. In this segment, I'd like to talk about Olympia's first film of this episode. It's called Cloudburst. Cloudburst is a 2011 film starring Olympia Dukakis as Stella and Brenda Fricker as Dottie, portraying a same-sex couple from Maine. Dottie is blind, and Stella, seemingly without complaint because of her cooler-than-thou, tequila-guzzling, old truck-driving bravado, takes care of her. They look happy, content, and the two have hilarious rapport. But Dottie, in her condition, is vulnerable to accidents. She rolls off the bed, more like Stella pushes her out during a play fight. Yes, she's totally cool to play fight a blind person. And Dottie sprains her backside. It requires 6 weeks of recovery. She's also got underlying conditions because she carries around the classic older woman prop, a Ziploc bag with a dozen different kind of pills that she takes on a daily basis. Still, Stella doesn't complain one bit. She makes fun of Dottie all the time, but never complains. We find out the two were childhood sweethearts, and assumingly, societal circumstances and rules from who knows who forced them to marry others, which Dottie did singularly, and remained to painfully label each other as best friends. Dottie raised a family with her husband and had grandchildren, but never let Stella get too far away. Not that she would have wanted to anyway. Stella waited for Dottie until her husband died, and they've been together 30 years. Stella has stayed with Dottie through vision loss and body changes that a lot of spouses or partners out there might not have been willing to stay through. So, when you consider the brutal, repressive trajectory it took to, let Stella and Dottie finally be together without too much trouble, it's a beautiful, triumphant relationship to witness in this film. While Dottie is in the hospital recovering from her fall, or push, depending on who's asking, Dottie's granddaughter, Molly, informs Stella she has made arrangements at a senior living center for her grandmother, and will allow Stella to remain in Dottie's house until she arranges something else for herself. That, arrogant storyline is common in film and in real life, unfortunately, as we know. Stella, our hero, responds by throwing her drink in Molly's face and then splatting her with flour to the face until she's driven out of her house, literally. Then Stella appears like she's going to crush Molly with her car before speedily driving off. It's kind of epic, and I laughed, like probably too much, as Molly got more and more scared. I know it's terrible, but she deserved it. As we'll learn, it's not wise to anger the person who holds that power. Unfortunately, Stella and Dottie are not married. It's not legal yet at the time. A lot has changed in a decade, hasn't it? And Molly is the only blood relative alive. So she and her power that's based on a technicality serves Stella court orders mandating Dottie leave her home. And she arrives with her cop husband to escort the grandmother out. Her reasoning is she needs to be in a place where trained people can help her. To which Stella bites back. I've been taking care of her for 30 years. Who's more trained than me? That's true. It's kind of a comical, in-your-face kind of scene. Molly's husband holds Stella back after he tries to wrestle her off of him. She throws things at him and yells obscenities I dare not repeat on this podcast. And it makes you laugh. That funny mood does take a turn when you realize Stella is forcibly being prevented from exiting her house as Molly guides Dottie into her car. And when she finally does break free from her hold, it's as the car carrying her love is backing away. Stella bangs on the car window and tries to pull the door open, whimpering for someone to unlock the door, knowing Dottie is not able to open it. All she can do is watch her love going somewhere against her will and not able to intervene. She's in her right to be as mad as anyone. It's heartbreaking, and there are too many stories like this. Especially, portrayed in something like Law & Order, when a patient is on life support and the spouse and the parents are arguing over what the final decision should be. I can think of at least 2 episodes that deal with that. It's dark and tragic, and a definite shift from the funny lifestyle we saw Stella and Dottie living together. And it's dark and tragic because you don't know who's in whose best interest and what they are really after. Are they after a gain and independence, or genuinely acting out of love for the other person? Stella, like a typical comedic heroine, devises a plan to break Dottie out of the senior living center in the middle of the night. It's a regular formula for, other slapstick comedies. She dresses as a patient, fooling the night staff to let her into the building. She chooses a random floor in the elevator and tiptoes room to room before she finds Dottie. She hides in someone else's bed beforehand when another staff member walks by, outsmarting even the best of them, Stella. Stella finds Dottie wide awake, as if she'd been waiting for her to come and get her, which she admits she was. She's roommates with a patient convinced that she's in the CIA and needs horse tranquilizers to go to sleep, to which Stella remarks, "They're keeping you here with a crazy person?" Dottie replies, "Yes, to ease my transition from 3 decades with you." Still, remember, Dottie waited up for Stella knowing she would rescue her. They exit the facility together, with Stella hilariously yelling at Dottie to run faster, which is met with, "Run? I can't run. Blind people don't run." I laughed. I like deprecating humor. They get into the car and drive off, with the mutual friend informing Stella the cops have put out an all-points bulletin on the 2 of them, which is a broadcast that contains information about a wanted suspect or a person of interest, that all law enforcement officers need to be on the lookout for. It's a movie. Just go with it. Stella convinces Dottie that the only way to come out of this alive is to get married. Stella won't have any rights or be able to help Dottie if they don't. And they need to go to Canada. That's the closest location where they can get legally married. They also get the idea for Canada because in 2005, Rosie O'Donnell led a cruise ship of 200 people to Halifax, where 10 same-sex couples had the opportunity to get married. And they did. So I think it's a ripoff of that moment. On their drive, they pick up a hitchhiker because it would be less obvious with 3 people in a truck than 2 old women. Surely that would throw the police off their scent. His name is Prentice. And he isn't wearing any underwear. Pants, shoes, unbuttoned shirt, check. But not underwear. He's handsome, strikingly so. I mean, even the least straight person, Stella, admits that. We don't get much from him initially. But as the car ride goes on, we find out he doesn't know who Katie Lang is, which based on Stella's horrified reaction, she's one step away from murdering him or throwing him out of the moving vehicle. I guess Katie Lang fanaticism is a requirement to date Stella. More character development goes on, and Prentice was a dancer on his way home to Canada to visit his sick mother, whom he fears will die of a bacterial lung infection before seeing him. So, he's in a rush. He hasn't had time to go through Katie Lang's discography. Stella. Gosh. Prentice and Dottie get along well. She protects him from Stella's jokes that Stella is enjoying more and more making at his expense. I think Prentice is the first person this whole trip that Stella feels like less of a caretaker because he doesn't need it. He can see. He can contribute to the trip and pull his weight, even alleviate a little of Stella's and Dottie's weight. And maybe Stella subconsciously knows this and is threatened by that, because that means she isn't as strong as she makes herself out to be to everyone and even to herself. She doesn't act her age, and Prentice might be the one to force her to. She won't take that lightly. So she protects herself by making comments on his mother's illness, saying, "I wouldn't want to die from bacteria. Mountain lions, rattlesnakes maybe, but not bacteria." And to that, Dottie gives her the always effective, good old-fashioned, "Shut up, Stella." Stella and Dottie and Prentice make it across the border to Prentice's family's home, of course not without trouble brought on by Stella's impulsive, foul mouth, but they make it. Prentice and his mother reunite really sweetly. We discover she and her new husband live on very little means. She's even hesitant to give him a mixture of 2 different kinds of cereals for breakfast because it's a little overindulgent and could put them out. His mother pleads with the women to take Prentice with him. He knows he can't stay at their house. He knew that going in. He, in return, begs her to come with him. But he hasn't the means either to support her and all the health needs she has. It's a terrible situation. But Prentice leaves. Begrudgingly, but he leaves. They come to a lake whose tide has receded so far that the whole muddy bottom is exposed. The 2 women walk across it, maybe a half a mile in. They talk, not about anything significant to the plot, but significant to them. They are standing in what would have been nearly 6 feet of water, and they marvel in that. Suddenly, on their walk back to the shore, the tide rushes in, and the women cannot get back fast enough. Dottie falls into the water, with Stella struggling to get her up. I want to really reflect in this scene, and it made me really sad, because I dealt with grandparents who fell on my watch. And the stress caused by figuring out a safe way for both of you to get up is horrible. And these 2 have the added danger of incoming waves. Stella screams. Prentice comes running. The woman went out much further than he could see them. With his help, they get Dottie up and back to shore safely. They are muddy and tired and scarred, but safe nonetheless. The trio make their way to the closest town with a county clerk office to fill out a marriage license, over which Stella and Dottie argue over who gets to be the bachelor and who gets to be the spinster. I'll let you guess. It's filed, they have their license, and are legally Canadian married. And all that's left is a ceremony. Stella asks Prentice to come back to the U.S. with them and live with them. She admits that if he wasn't there to help him out of the water that day, they both would have died. Stella practices a moment of humility that isn't easy for her to achieve, but she's putting Dottie's safety first and realizing she can't take care of her alone. The next day, their ceremony is crashed by Molly and her husband, and it's revealed Molly tried to move her grandmother into the nursing home to seize her house and bank account. Did she speak to Nicolas Cage's former money manager? Because that's right up his alley. More is exposed between Molly and Dottie to fill in the pieces that we didn't get. It shows a less than stellar family history, one tarnished by accusations, impulsiveness, lies, and pain. Molly was basically taken away from Dottie after her husband passed away, because Dottie was blamed for his death. Molly's mother was also angry and went to live with her in-laws. Dottie feared Molly was raised to hate her as well. Miscommunication, classic miscommunication, everyone. See where it leads? To people trying to steal your stuff. They reconcile, as of course they would, and decide to have a ceremony back in the U.S. However, on the ride back, Dottie starts to feel intense chest pain like never before. She can't do anything but succumb to it. They know what will happen next. They pull over. Dottie and Stella hold hands over Preston sitting in the middle, and he officiates their wedding. The heroines get married, just like that. A build-up upon build-ups to get what simply matters. Them. Dottie passes shortly after, and Stella never leaves her side until the paramedics come. The film ends with Stella and Prentice back home in Maine, looking up at the clouds during sunset and figuring out all their shapes, just as Stella did for Dottie in the opening of the film. The last line to me is the real winner here. Prentice says, "You waited 31 years, and you only had that one day." Stella replies without missing a beat, "Best day of my life." We know from that they'll be okay. Stay tuned for the third segment, where I go into a quick analysis of Cloudbursts and bring up the next film of the podcast starring Olympia Dukakis called Emily and Tim.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back. Here is my quick analysis of Cloudburst. I really liked this film. Originally a play written by American-Canadian film and theater director Tom Fitzgerald, The script was adapted for the screen to include Olympia and Brenda Fricker. It debuted at the Atlanta Film Festival in Canada in 2011 and was given an enthusiastic standing ovation amongst Best Screenplay and People's Choice Audience Awards for Best Film of the festival. It went on to win awards in other cities like Halifax, Montreal, Vancouver, and made its U.S. debut at the Palm Springs International Film Festival. In her 2018 documentary, there is a scene recording Olympia chastising the CEO of the Toronto International Film Festival for rejecting Cloudbursts. She said, "You called it a senseless film that meanders. You could have just said no." "Oh, what do you know anyway?" "You tell him, Olympia." That woman's gumption was unmatched. Can you even imagine doing what she did? Incredible. The film won awards at festivals outside of North America as well, including Australia, Dublin, Birmingham, London, Athens, Barcelona, and New Zealand. This film portrays a love story at its core. It's a moving love story that spans age, political climates, marriage statuses, jobs, angry relatives, and different levels of health. Olympia shined in this film, unsurprisingly. And I think it's because Stella and her were almost the same person. Both were brash go-getters with incredible hearts that not many had the privilege of seeing. Only the person they loved had that honor. They desired independence and kept a distance from those they weren't sure about. They were both quick-witted with a mouth of a trucker. Worse than one, actually. They pushed people's boundaries and comforts by openly discussing sex at the most random moments and to total strangers. Stella is crass in her talk of sex, quickly sharing her feelings on the subject, which out of nowhere and it's really inappropriate, and she'll criticize you on yours. Olympia spoke openly about her one-night stands before her marriage, too. To her, they were the most exciting thing because they were always different. No two ever ended the same. She summoned a mighty performance for this role by capturing the little complexities of a woman who was only certain of one thing in her whole life, that she loves another woman named Dottie. And I'm not surprised, not one bit. Olympia always did her research. Now, I want to discuss a film that she acted in alongside her husband in a film called Emily and Tim. Okay, Emily and Tim. It was a ride. Not the straightest, or the smoothest, or easiest to understand. I personally am prone to motion sickness, so I know what an uncomfortable ride is that I want to jump out of. Even one that the car doesn't even need to stop completely. I'm out. Emily and Tim is a film chronicling the relationship between, as you can guess, Emily and Tim, over several decades. Two young people who meet in a bar in the 50s, and it takes off from there. The film displays their marriage in 6 acts. The first is attraction, the time period they meet. The second is discord, and Emily and Tim are married with a young child in the 1960s. The film is narrated by the always distinguishable Kathleen Turner, whom, actually, I had an interesting ride in the elevator with a few years ago back when I was in conservatory. She's my best friend, basically. She makes a note to say at this part, it was the 1960s. The sexual revolution was happening all around them. Notice she said, around them, because it's definitely not happening to them. They're miserable. We get some more personality and backstory now. Emily is studying to be a pediatric practical nurse, and Tim is an editor at a publishing company. Immediately, you know they aren't happy. She gets dinner ready while juggling her sick child when he barges home after work and immediately comments he hates the fish he smells. Sitting down to eat, he confirms what he smells was indeed fish, and insults Emily even more by asking how much it cost at the supermarket. Heartbroken, she gathers their fillets into a napkin and storms off to return it. When she returns, Tim is surprised she got the money back because the food was already cooked. And she proceeds to throw the money at him, which is all in pennies, I might add. Savage move, Emily. Another hostile situation they find themselves in is over their daughter. Tim leaves Saturday morning to play golf, leaving a very angry Emily without a car and without a husband because he's gone most of the week for work, and the one time he has a day off, he's out again. This anger is justified even more because their daughter Meg suffers an asthma attack and she has no other option to get to the hospital than in a taxi. When time is of the essence more than ever, she has no means to get around. She needs to wait. It's a clear message about her husband's priorities. I mentioned we learned more about Tim and Emily as individuals. By this I mean what is going on through their minds, because until the Discord segment, we don't know anything really about them. We find out Tim is unhappy because Emily doesn't do it for him. He's arrogant. He envisioned himself with a woman who read poetry, played the violin, could quote authors like he can. He is an editor after all. But he's with a nurse. The narrator even says, emphasis on the practical. Tim corrects her grammar, criticizes her choices, and expects her to be okay with his, even at her exclusion. This chapter ends with the two arguing in the hospital, with Tim even questioning why Emily took a taxi to the hospital in the first place. What should we have done? Wait for a bus? She says. Tim also asks, to just show his ignorance again, can you even die from an asthma attack? He's just full of interesting questions, isn't he? He's not someone I want in an emergency, that's for sure. This chapter ends with the doctor informing them that their daughter's airways have opened up, but not without trouble that no parent wants to hear. For 30 seconds, their daughter stopped breathing. Emily, in a fury and rage only a mother on the brink of losing her child could muster, says, if anything happens to that child. And then it ends. Discord is a rough start to their story, especially after the first chapter, which showed them hooking up most of the time, like people do in a new romance. It was a shift, but it gave more information about these characters than we have ever seen before, especially for Tim. Emily we get a good sense of already in how she interacts with her child and manages her studying at the same time. But Tim? That's new. When they explain the compatibility issue between them, how she's not the girl he'd imagined himself with, that came out of nowhere for me. Tim's love for writing and literature was not addressed ever before. I didn't know his backstory, what kind of home he came from, that would allow him to have this sense of entitlement that he carried around. In the first chapter, he works as a dishwasher in a diner, so I don't think he came from a wealthy home where he had a lot of opportunities to just learn about the things that he liked. So I don't know how he formed the holier-than-thou attitude, especially since Emily is in a noble profession of her own, an extremely noble, difficult, hard-working profession. So I don't see the reason to highlight these stark differences between them. I don't think they're so stark. I don't think it's so crazy that he's an editor and she's a nurse. She might not be book smart, but she's street smart, more than him. But I will give the writers and directors some points for consistency. Tim's behavior through this chapter is consistent with someone who's self-centered. So they were good on connecting the things he did and the choices he made that maintained his narrative. Correcting her grammar, working at the table, really only showing respect for the intelligence of their daughter, not her, things like that. It worked to create the picture that they wanted us to see of him. The third chapter is called Betrayal. We've moved on to the 1970s. I recognize the brown-colored polyester everything. And the mismatchiness between the couple has carried itself into this decade and gruesome. Tim is now editor-in-chief, the second highest position in his company, and Emily is the head nurse of her department. She's on top, and he's second in his world. But he still carries the jerky attitude. He's clearly into his secretary. She's beautiful, quotes all the French authors in the world, and cooks French food. That's the narrative they're creating there. Similarly with Emily, a father of her patient is exceptionally flirty with her, and she likes it. And him. So they have their affairs going on. Emily and Tim have a dry spell in their intimacy. I mean, no kidding. So they seek it out with other people. We've seen this before in a trillion other films. At the end of this chapter, we get our first look into Emily and Tim in the present day as an old couple. This scene right here, I thought, was the best in the whole movie. Tim is sick with a condition causing abnormal breathing. The medicine he takes kills any desire for intimacy and his overall mood. One night, after visiting an old friend in a nursing home for advanced Alzheimer's, he wakes Emily up with an idea. He hands her a pill bottle and wants the two of them to take them, to go out together before things get worse. He has no joy. He can't play golf anymore. Most of his friends have passed or are in nursing homes, and no one will illustrate his book because he's an old man. There's no appeal in working with an old man. It's the most human and relatable I've ever seen Tim yet in this movie. Emily retorts, "What about my headaches? You don't see me complaining." Typical of you, whenever life doesn't give you exactly what you want to take your ball and go home. And what's worse, you want to take me with you. "Only if you want to," Tim says. "Well, I don't want to," is her response as she turns around to ignore the rest of what he has to say. This scene saved the whole film for me. It was quick, spoken fluidly, and filled with key dialogue only. No roundabout discussion, it was straight to the point. It felt the best theatrically in its acting and cinematically in its cinematography, the bed set, the shot of the bathroom sink crowded with medicine bottles, and the last shot, which is a close-up on Tim tracing his wrinkles and loose eyelids with his face and wondering, what the heck happened that I look like this? Where'd the time go? I'm not going to elaborate on the other couple chapters of the movie because they're not about Olympia Dukakis specifically, and that's what this episode is about, and I won't be distracted. Olympia appears in the film as older Emily, whenever she's up to bat. I mentioned that scene between Emily and Tim talking about overdosing as my favorite. That's because it was Olympia playing alongside her real-life husband, Louis Zorich. Their chemistry was the best, in this film specifically, but also in real life. They were partners to the fullest and deepest extent of the word. They had unconditional love and support for one another. He was her favorite actor, and she was his. That seamless energy between the two was so palpable that it guided the scene almost entirely. They knew how to play together and fulfill the character's objective in the scene. The film was full of good actors portraying Emily and Tim in the other stages of their life. The cast included Alexis Bledel, Zosha Mamet, Kal Penn, and Felicia Rashad. They're all big names, and they're very credible. They know what they're doing. I love to watch them in other things that they do. But every scene not starring Olympia and Louis, who she lovingly called Lulu in real life, fell short to me. But these two lifted it up and carried it to the end, so I could enjoy it a little more than if they had not been in it. She could do no wrong, in my opinion, and I enjoyed Olympia's dynamic performance that brought this injured film over the finish line. I wouldn't expect anything less from her. Stay tuned for the last segment.
Watching TV has changed over time. Streaming has become the new norm. That's why Golden State Media Concepts television podcast dives headfirst to the world of cord cutting. Want to be on the loop of what's hot in Netflix? Or if it's not a preference, what about original shows in Hulu? We've got you covered. Join us as we fill in the blanks and talk about movies to stream and what show you should be binging. This is the Golden State Media Concepts television podcast.
Welcome back. Here we finally are at the fourth segment. First, thank you for listening all the way through. I really appreciate it, and I hope you've learned something about Olympia and are inspired to watch her body of work. As she got older, she was cast in some roles that centered around a common storyline for older people: death. Either that of her character or of someone close to her. I think personally that's an underutilization of the talents and skills an older actress has. They didn't live as long as they did and acquire the knowledge that they have just to use it to talk about death. It's pretty one-dimensional. There are other journeys an older person can take. They aren't limited with just learning how to prepare for the other side, if you will. They can still go places, do activities, learn lessons, rekindle or break off relationships, cry, laugh, kiss, whatever else they want to do, right here and now. That, unfortunately, was a lot of Olympia's role in the last decade or so. If she wasn't the old person dying, then someone next to her was. Just like old people stumbling around, abiding their time until the final moment. Olympia, though, still managed to play, and poke fun, and bring seriousness when necessary, so that the film wasn't so linear. That's the gift of a real actor, a real pretender who is so perceptive to the nuances of any situation that you might not be aware of without her showing you. She could show me anything, anytime. I'd have killed to work with her. I planned on it. I felt that our moment, Olympia and me, was so destined that, I didn't move fast enough. I have a lot to learn so that I don't make that mistake again. In her 2018 documentary, which aired after the passing of her beloved Louis, she's asked if she's afraid of death. As she's swallowing some prescription medication keeping her alive, they ask her if she's afraid of death. How comedy of errors. She says she was only concerned with not being able to feel. No species is as conscious as us humans. We are the only mammals, maybe besides elephants, with a knowledge and awareness of death, of no longer talking, walking, breathing. And to not know for sure, if we continue in another form in another place, that's maddening to all of us, for sure. But to Olympia, she was just concerned with not feeling. That's the main skill of an actor too. Feeling. Processing feelings, reacting to feelings, and reacting one way or another. Like a chef needs his hands to cook, or a painter needs his brushes, etc., an actor relies on his toolbox of emotions. She was a true thespian. I'll say it, a thespian. A rare breed. That's what made her Academy Award win for Moonstruck so special. someone who had dedicated herself to the arts in all forms, trying it all, someone who had been around a long time and just did her thing, was being recognized for it. She didn't publicize her doings or gain anything from them. She was just present and doing the work like a normal person. She kept her circle of friends and coworkers small and close by. A teacher in New York University's drama department for many years, she often brought former students to work with her and for her, whether as actors or directors. Her loyalty was intense, second to that of her appetite to work and perform. As I say that, and as I wrote in the episode and did the research on her for this episode, I think I have subconsciously modeled myself after her. As I navigate this crazy business, I want to be like her. I want to do this just like her. Not in the headlines 24/7, actually never really in the headlines, but acquiring her successes quietly and being the best actor out there, a real actor's actor. Everyone who is a big name will always credit her, if they worked with her, for being the teacher and the inspiration and the most fun person they ever met. She had an impeccable range that no one could fight you on or try to discredit you on. She chose her projects based on their quality, not based on their budget or who's in it or what company is supporting it. She traveled all over the world to work and perform, not staying between New York and Los Angeles only, that, can be cesspools that once you're sucked in, it's hard to get out, especially in this field. She often worked in Canada, in Maine, in Louisiana, anywhere where talent dared to emerge. She went to see it and participate. They don't make them like her anymore. Because of her, I know what I'm supposed to be doing. And I encourage you all to find somebody to look up to that'll help you make that discovery. Be it Olympia or anyone else you like. Though you're welcome to share, she'd love that. I know many people feel like I do. She was a special broad with a no-holds-barred attitude and a zest to find the good stories. She never failed in that. Let's remember her that way. Rest in peace, Olympia, you theatrical diamond in the house lights. I'll carry your abilities with me for a long time. With that, I want to thank you for listening to the GSMC Movie Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. If you like this episode, please subscribe to the show and write a nice review. That would really help us. Also, if you can, please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. In the spirit of Olympia, let's continue to support each other. Thank you.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Movie Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.